Greg Ligon. I'm part of the team at Leadership Network and excited to be here this afternoon in a conversation with a couple of really great leaders. Mingo Palacios, who's at Saddleback Church. I'll introduce him a little bit more in just a few moments, but also on our team, John Poitevent, who is heading up our Innovate Now experience that we're providing this year at Leadership Network. And we're here today to talk a little bit about millennials and some generational things that we believe are an important issue that's a part of what's happening in the dialogue of the church today. A couple weeks back, I asked Mingo for the opportunity to touch base with him just to pick his brain a little bit. We've been trying to figure out this millennial thing at Leadership Network for the last 18 months or so and keep bumping up against a wall a little bit. And so I'm just trying to connect with folks who are living in the space and understanding how some of that's working. So I had the opportunity to connect with Mingo. At the end of our conversation, it was just a phone call. We said, man, we wish we'd been recording this. And so we just said, hey, let's do it. So I'm going to welcome Mingo. Mingo is, as I mentioned, is on this team with Saddleback currently. Formerly, he was at the Rock Church and had experience there as a young adult pastor, creative arts ministry, helped them actually launch some of their microsite work. But now is on the team at Saddleback, and so welcome, Mingo. We're glad to have the opportunity to be here this afternoon with you.
Greg, so glad to be here. Honored to be on the line with you guys. Excited to talk intergenerational observations in ministry, and humbled to represent the millennial sector as I'm approaching my 35th birthday. It's kind of wild to me to think that I'm now in a pivot position to talk on behalf of my generation to really help the Capital C Church move forward.
Very good. I've got a couple of decades on you generationally, so it's fun to have this conversation though. I've got two boys, 18 and 20, so they're right in the heart of it, so I'm learning from that space as well. John, why don't you say a word of welcome as well?
Excited to be on here with Mingo because he's going to be joining us in just a few weeks. June 8th, we're going to be doing an Innovate Now one-day gathering here in Dallas that's called Generation Next. That is talking about how can we learn, collaborate together, and create a better future for the church and connecting with millennials and the next generation. And so Mingo's going to be joining us. He's going to be talking about developing leaders and raising up leaders of millennials. Grant Skeldon, who is a younger millennial, he's in his late 20s, mid-20s. He started Initiative Network here in Dallas, and he's going to be giving really a millennial's perspective of the church and of also his own generation and what he feels like are accurate or inaccurate portrayals there. And then J.P. Pecluda from Watermark Church, he pastors there and leads The Porch, which is a Tuesday night gathering of over 3,000 millennials every Tuesday night. So I think we got a little bit to learn from him about leading and discipling millennials. So if you want to check that out, you can go to our website and click on Programs, Innovate Now, Generation Next, and you can learn more about registering for the June 8th event here in Dallas.
Thank you, John. Mingo, let's dive right in. One of the things that you're doing now is you're traveling around the country in an RV. I think you're actually in it right now. Is that right?
This is true. I'm live direct from the tour bus, the RV, the purpose-driven RV.
I love it. I love it. One of the things that they're doing is Mingo and his team are traveling around the country and connecting at conferences and at churches and talking to millennials that are leaning in and are engaged in local churches. And so one of the questions that I ask him that we want to talk a little bit about this afternoon is, what are some of the things you're learning? Why are millennials engaging in local churches where you're finding that happen?
Well, so the tour that we're on has been afforded us by the Purpose-Driven Church Network. And, you know, what's interesting is just the permission that I've found myself operating in is actually a great case note for the reason why me as a millennial am still digging into local church, and then hearing it over and over and over again from several of the places that we've had the luxury of going and visiting with. You think, 40 years ago, almost to the date, Rick Warren did some massive disruption inside of the Southern Baptist world, right? When he launched Saddleback Church, some of the big things that kind of changed the way church was done was he got rid of, right, the choir robes. He got rid of, the formal suit, formal attire. He was baptizing people, not in the church, but in people's jacuzzis and in their pools and at the beach. And 40 years later, right, while I am now stepping into kind of their ecosystem, we're seeing a lot of those same intentions, disruption-wise, across the map. It's not a Southern California thing. It's not a denominational thing. I think that it really is a generational thing where people are asking the question, with me and my unique experience when it comes to the Jesus that I love and the church that I learn about him from, would you be willing to entertain my interest inside of this ecosystem? And the churches that are winning the most, the organizations that are seeing the most buy-in from millennials are the ones that are creating unique sandboxes where they can have not just input, because input and influence are two very different things, right? Input says, hey, I want to invite you to my office for an hour and I want to hear your big pains, your big frustrations, your big dreams about the local church. Influence says, I want to give you a budget, no matter how small or big it is. I want to give you a little bit of space inside of this organization. I want to give you a sandbox that you can actually apply some of those dreams, visions, some of that mission that's burning inside of you. I want to sponsor it. I want to underwrite it. I want to give you a platform where you can practice it. And I think that the local churches that are winning in the race to win millennials, I think are the ones that are actually taking bigger risks and providing a platform for them to discover how the church and their generation play well together.
Thanks for those great responses. I'm going to bump it over to John. John, you have a couple questions you'd like to ask as well.
Yeah, Mingo, I love your story of having ideas and being empowered in those ideas. And as we talk about innovation at Leadership Network, we talk about how the U.S. spends over $400 billion a year on it, and a massive amount of that money does not see a win. It does not see an immediate result. You learn about how to not do things in a lot of ways.
Right.
But I see the church struggling to take those kinds of risks or to even allow failure as an option. It seems like everything initiative we push kind of has to be a home run or we're not going to do it.
Totally.
But innovation and change, disruption, as you talked about, requires that courage and that culture of allowing everything not to be a home run. Talk a little bit about your leaders and how they gave you some space and how they handled that when everything doesn't go perfect, how they encouraged you and led you in that and made you feel safe to pursue your dreams.
That's great. So in the context of local ministry trench work at my prior assignment at the Rock in San Diego, if you would just come onto the scene, if you would have, let's say, opened the book to the page when we started microsites, you wouldn't be getting the full story of how we slowly became a trusted disruptive department. And I'm speaking on behalf of the entire young adult community that helped us lead this charge. I had an executive leader by the name of Ted Vaughn. And Ted was in charge of two unique ministries. He was in charge of worship arts, basically everything that showed up on the Sunday platform, and he was in charge of young adult ministry. As strangely as those two seem on paper, culturally, they're right in line with one another, because the young adult ministry is paying into and hearing the heartbeat of the generation now, and worship arts is really a reflection of the greatest of what we're experiencing in the moment, offering it out to the church at large. When we were afforded those opportunities to try, it was funny how they hit. In my mind, they were instant wins because we were given the permission, despite the return on that investment, we were told we were allowed to go try. And so irregardless of its return, let's say financially, let's say butts and seats, how many people showed up on Sunday, or let's say how many people filled out the interest card. What I loved about my executive leadership at the time was them just giving me permission was a deep hook in my heart that this place was a place that was willing to foster creative ideas, even if they weren't proven at the moment. So they were willing to pioneer and put the machete in my hand and say, there's the wild, untapped place. Go, we'll support you every step of the way. When we showed up on the ground with those efforts, what it did was subliminally, it told our communities, wow, this church isn't just locked up in its Sunday 4 services plus midweek gatherings. They're trying new things, and they're willing to go to the places that other churches aren't even willing to try in order to draw a bridge to communities it's yet to reach. And what I loved about it was that they were sending guys like me in my mid-20s out on behalf of the church. And so it doesn't require, in my mind, whatever you draw as your big win, whatever the win is. I always tell organizations, I tell churches, I tell ministries, I tell pastors, the win is that you created the opportunity for a next generation leader to try. That in itself is something that you should be applauding and celebrating. What its return is, I think, has to be fluid, right? Because when I set out to do young adult ministry for my peers, I couldn't have written down on the 1-page vision paper that I submitted to my executive leader that we would launch a brick and mortar in the downtown area 3 years later that would house 14 startup companies and 4 other churches that weren't our own. I couldn't have predicted that, but the permission to have a sandbox to respond to the desires of the generation at hand that we were trying to reach afforded us these mobile and these motion ministries that somehow captured in a way things that we would have never been able to capture if we said, we're setting out for this, and when we get that return, that's when we'll reinvest. It was a very fluid effort. So I would say to somebody looking to emulate something that will help a young adult win and find significance inside of their organization, figure out what they have control over sandbox wise. We use that word sandbox, and then carve it out for them and create places, back to Greg, his comment earlier, where there can be a legitimate, a transparent conversation when I hit a roadblock, that I could bring that roadblock to you and you go, you know what, 20 years ago when I was XYZ doing XYZ, here's some of the pains that I felt alongside of the same thing that you're feeling in this moment. I don't need you to solve my problem. I just need you to identify with it so I know, cool, there's a guy out there and he cares and he's willing to have coffee with me to help me keep going. That's, I think, the big aha moment. It's not going to be in these formalized weekly meetings. I think it's in this impromptu, we have a high value on meetups as a millennial, right? Where I can call a meeting that week and say, hey, would you meet with me on Tuesday? The place is irrelevant. The office is irrelevant. I just want to know that you're willing to connect and hear the pains as I'm trying to produce something on behalf of your church. Now, inside of the Saddleback ecosystem, this whole example is a perfect position for you. They didn't have a podcast. They didn't have an RV at the time that I came on, but they baited me with significance. So they said, hey, we have a platform that we've watched Rick build for the last 38 years. With what you're doing for next generation leaders, mainly raising them up to be volunteer leaders in that vehicle microsites, would you be willing to use the groundswell that we have really tapped into, and would you be willing to pioneer some of those efforts on behalf of our team? So it wasn't a job description fully laid out. It was really, what are you passionate about? What is your generation passionate about? And how can we supply you with the tools needed to accomplish that vision? That to me was enough to hook, line, and sink me for the rest of my life. Honestly, I read The Purpose-Driven Church the month before I came on to this organization and was blown away at all the things that Rick had penned, 20 years ago about how he rediscovered his passion for the local church by pioneering a new version of it. I think that for us, I think that we as local leaders, we need to be able to create a platform not to elevate ourselves and our own church's mission, but to really say, I want to be consumed with what's burning in your heart, next generation leader, next generation volunteer, next generation person attending my church. I want to dedicate a portion of my calendar to hearing and propelling your burdens, because that will earn me major, it'll earn me major credit with the rest of your peers, because chances are if you give him a platform, he's going to start talking about it. And everything dials back to the person that's giving them wind beneath their wings, if I could reference a really terrible 80s song.
Very millennial reference there.
Yeah, but does that make sense? Is that resonating with you?
Let's not slam the 80s now. Come on.
Hey man, it gave us some of the best music ever, only to be, eclipsed by the 70s behind you.
Amigo, if I could just kind of sum up what I hear you saying is that, John Seal, who we've worked with some, would say, if you think this is about rebranding, you've totally missed the point. And while churches may need some rebranding, while they may need some updating on some things, what I'm saying is, rather than trying to scheme up ways to attract a generation, engage and empower those that are in your midst and listen to them and coach and mentor them, give them your time, and you will see that demographic grow among you as you do that in a substantial and valuable way, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Before we go back, I want John to share just a few more minutes to remind you of the opportunity we're going to have together in Dallas, June the 8th. I know, Mingo, you guys are doing some special things at Saddleback through Purpose Driven as well. You want to give us a little bit of update on what that's coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one, I'm extremely excited to be a part of your guys' conversation in Dallas. I think that's going to be so informative. I think that's the best thing, is that we can just open our playbook and we can talk about what it is that we're observing. There's tons of best practice to be had. And I really appreciate you guys having the position and posture to say, hey, we're ready to learn, because that's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to collect enough stories to put them on display so that we can get a better idea of what the church has to look forward to if we engage intelligently. In June, what Rick has done that's been so great, he used to run the Purpose Driven Conference every year without an interruption. And then 10 years ago, he stopped. And that effort went global as he started to engage a global conversation about how the church best connects with itself on behalf of those that don't know Jesus yet. Well, last year we reignited that conversation, and we saw over 3,500 people come and hear from Rick, right? The sage, the pioneer himself. And we're going to re-kick that conversation again in June. It's June 27th through 29th. I'll be one of the conversations being had inside of that. We'll be facilitating some conversation there, but really it's to hear from the pioneer that brought, purpose-driven life and purpose-driven church to the market, and what God is doing in his final lap. This is really interesting. He only committed to 40 years only. He committed to 40 years at the local level. And we're seeing him now approach his last lap. And so what he sees by way of hope and hope renewed, that conference is happening. And if people listening want to have a discount, I've got a discount code that people can do. They just need to contact me through your guys' channels, and I'll offer a discount for them to attend if they'd like to do that.
Perfect. John, one final reminder about the LeadNet Innovate Now conversation coming up.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with Innovate Now, it's a new gathering that we started at the end of 2016. It's a one-day here in Dallas. You'll be gathering with church leaders from around the country. Every other month, we do this on a different topic. We've done it on strategic staffing. Last time we did it on generosity and stewardship. And this one's on next gen. And so you'll be with other leaders from around the country. You'll hear some speakers. You'll learn some information. You'll hear some best practices. But you'll also have a chance to learn and collaborate with other churches, and then create a strategic plan for yourself from what you've learned and what you want to take away from it. So at Leadership Network, we never want to just share information. We always want to help you move forward into action and implementation. And from there, we see that's where we get impact and results. So if you want to grow in this area, you want to learn, connect with some other churches, it's June 8th. We'll have a link right here on next to the video. But if you need to, the URL is leadnet.org/innovate now. And just email us messages if you have any questions. We hope to see you there.
Very good. Thanks, John. And also thanks, Mingo. So appreciate the time to connect with you again this afternoon. Looking forward to hanging out with you and the rest of the gang that's going to be here at Innovate Now. And any last words as we close off?
I just don't be afraid to engage. And you know what? You hold in you the greatest thing. It's a platform to develop leaders and a savior named Jesus. I mean, that coupled together, you know, it's a impassable offer. You can't pass up an offer to be invested in by the next generation. And you've got Jesus in the best playbook ever in the gospel. So I'm excited to connect in the next couple of weeks. I am thrilled that we get to share, hopefully, something that can inspire another church to make a better striding effort at the next generation.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thanks, John. Thanks, Mingo. And we'll look forward to seeing all of you June the 8th in Dallas at Innovate Now, Generation Next.